Alright team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, as you grow more Frontline update for the 30th of October 2023. Sorry, my brain's a bit foggy, not feeling tip-top today, although since JR has kindly done the mapping, I better get on and do the Frontline update. Goodness me, what a legend. Thanks, mate. So here is the Frontline update. The map, if you don't know what lines mean on the map, please pause the video and check out the key there. There are some blue pins here, so that's looking pretty good for the Ukrainians. There are some elements, though, of Russian gains as well. We're going to go to the Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea front line, and we're going to start up in the north, right by Kupiansk, where, as you can see, according to Syriac maps, there are some gains north of Sinkivka, which is fairly significant, given that this is where the Russians have been pushing quite a lot recently. I think possibly Syriac Mats has been overcooking it a little bit for the Russians in this general area and has walked back several advances that were otherwise claimed. If we go to Syriac Mats, pro-Russian mapper, they say, situation on northeastern front. Recent video footage shows Russian tank attacking Ukrainian army positions north of Sinkivka, which confirms all the Russian advances northeast of the town were reversed. So this is a bit of a reversal of that, and it could just be that they never actually happened in the first place, which is kind of what Andrew Perpetua would say in terms of where he's placed the Russian lines there. But nonetheless, a move towards an agreement between the mappers a little bit more in this area, though there is still quite a significant difference along this Sinkivka down to Orlansky axis there. But yeah, some rejigging, or the Ukrainians have made counterattack gains there over the last, I guess, couple of weeks or so. And then there is activity claimed along the front line in various places down to Makivka, although in the ISW Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, they say that in this Liman direction that it has been quiet for the last 24 hours, so no attacks there. Although we come to the south and look at the Serebyansky forest area, we have some gains for the Ukrainians again here. So this is according to Syriac maps, where the situation on the eastern front as a result of positional battles, Ukrainian army managed to recover some parts of the forest area west of Shiplivka. So that's good again for the Ukrainians in that direction. Yeah, it's not too often that we see any changes to the mapping inside the forest area, partially because it's so difficult to get evidence of changes there. If you're talking about shelling and who is where, when you have a canopy over you, it's very difficult to work out, what is going on. So it tends not to move as much maybe as other places. Andrew Perpetua himself says he doesn't like mapping in the forest too much there. Okay, so as we come down to Bakhmut, there are some claims of still, activity to the north of Bakhmut in the Bakivka area. We've seen that the Russians have made gains there over the last few days. We're going to look now to the south, though, in the Klishchivka area down to Andriivka and Kurdyamivka there. If we come to the ISW, what they say is geolocated footage published on the 29th of October indicates that Ukrainian forces advance east of the railway line south of Andriivka. Okay, well, let's have a look at some of the claims concerning Bakhmut at the moment and try and see what those geolocations are. Syriac Maps says indeed that the Ukrainians have pushed to the east across the railway line just south of Andriivka, which is exactly kind of what this claim is making, so they're probably using the same data there. And then we have Global War Monitor saying next to the settlement of Andriivka, so again to the east and to the south, Ukraine has managed to cross the railway again and entrench themselves on the eastern side. And then when we come to look at some geolocations here, we have this is actually, we'll come back to that one. So the one from the ISW is this one, where the drones here are dropping munitions on the Ukrainians. So this is where the Ukrainians are. Let's go and plug that into Google Earth and see where the Ukrainians are. Well, that is indeed to the east of the railway line, so that would suggest that the Russian lines have been pushed back there. That fits in exactly with what these claims are. So if the Ukrainians are there, then the Russians aren't going to be right next to them. They're going to be some way back on their own sort of defensive line, and that is what both the mappers indicate here. That Suriyat maps here says that's about half a kilometre between where the Ukrainians are and where they claim the Russians are. Andrew Perpetua a little bit less. So they're obviously very close in that area. Now, if we go and look at this footage, so this footage is, I can't really show it to you, it's a bit inappropriate, mortars and artillery going off amongst Russian troops and drones and whatnot. But the geolocation is here, and the source states that it's probably a failed Russian attack near the village of Zelenopilia. So just to give you an idea, this is where we're coming down to Kurdyamivka. Just north of Kurdyamivka, between Andriivka and Kurdyamivka, the Russians might have been attacking. Let's put that on my map. We are going to see a geolocation which is going to exist somewhere around here. So let's go and plug that in to see where the Russians have been attacking. And indeed, just north of Kurdyamivka and northwest of Zelenopilia, the Russians have been sending a couple of armoured vehicles and a bunch of troops, but they've been having a pretty hard time of it there. So quite active around there, and that's what Andrew Perpetua signifies is the Russian front line pretty much. Suriyat maps has the other side of the railway line. I would say that's possibly unlikely. I'd favour Andrew Perpetua's line in that area. So we can see that the Ukrainians are still keeping up the momentum here. They are making gains, albeit small gains on a daily basis. It is fairly consistent, and they are pushing the Russians back further and further to the east towards Odradivka and this grand line of communication, this road that comes into Opitny in the south of Bakhmut. Okay, so let's now come further to the south towards Avdiivka, and lots of conversation to be had about Avdiivka again. This is where, as you can see, the Russians are having most of their success, although different mappers. So Suriyat Maps is now agreeing with Andrew Perpetua there that those lines for the Russian lines are going right along the railway line there, and that Deep State map, which I don't actually have out, so let's have Deep State map, which is the pro-Ukrainian mapper, having some gains for the Russians there, now poking a little bit further out from the slag heap, and that is a bit of a worry. If that's true, then that is encroaching ever closer to the coke plants and the northwestern industrial area of Avdiivka. And if the Russians can get in there, then you've got serious trouble. Now, one would assume that's a grey zone. That is a worry for the Ukrainians, I would wager. There are various claims that the Ukrainians are throwing quite a lot of equipment possibly and troops from elsewhere into this sector. We'll come to some of those claims in a second, but just to continue the mappers here, we have some gains for the Russians from Andrew Perpetua, Deep State maps, and this darker one is Suriyat maps there, just around the Vodyania area, and indeed all the mappers agreeing with what Suriyat maps said the other day, which is the sand quarry by Opitny was taken by the Russians, and that seems to be the case there. So again, worrying for the Ukrainians as the pincer does seem to be closing. What do the different sources say here? We'll go to the ISW first, I guess. Quite a bit to say in there. A Russian news aggregator claimed that Russian forces consolidated positions at the Avdiivka waste heap on the 28th and are gradually advancing south of Avdiivka and near Siverny, which is exactly what you see, the waste heap there, and towards Siverny, which is just here. So they are getting closer and closer to Siverny. That is a worry. Although, as we come to the bottom of this section, Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces counterattacked near Avdiivka yesterday. So that was actually 28th, was what we were talking about before. That's 2 days ago, but did not make any claimed or confirmed advances. The Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces counterattacked near the waste heap, but do not control the waste heap. So there could well have been a Ukrainian counterattack to try and take the waste heap there. And we go to Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter in Ukraine at the moment. He says, a short one from Kenneth Gregg. So the Russian offensive in Avdiivka is broken. It's a very positive outlook as to how it's going for the Ukrainians there. Very little is being reported from Avdiivka, but from the soldiers I've spoken to, the case is clear. The enemy attacks are now much more lame, and those who have been captured all say that most of the soldiers are refusing to rush to certain death. Equipment and armoured vehicles are too few to be used for an effective assault, plus the equipment needs a lot of maintenance, and that maintenance does not exist. On the Eastern Front, we have dinner in what we in Finland call a korsu, a protective structure for crews or weapons partially or completely buried underground. In the contact line, it is important to not have too high heat points that can be detected by drones. If that happens, it will be blown up. Our soldiers say about trench candles that they very quickly affect the lungs. At the moment, they are the only source of heat for cooking food. Stoves and other things can be used in lines 1 and 2, but not at the 0 line, the contact line. So just a little aside there. Now that is a much more positive outlook than maybe the mapping might suggest. But have the Russians really exhausted themselves in terms of the equipment? Well, actually, they might not need so much equipment now as they go into fighting in settlements like the coke plant in the northwest there. So we shall see, I guess. This source, Ukraine battle map, says in the past month, Russian forces have advanced up to 1.7 kilometers from their positions at the start of October. In total, Russian forces are confirmed to have lost at least 50 tanks and 120 APCs or IFVs in the past month on the front. And as we have been told numerous times, probably a lot more than that. So you can see it's a nice clear image of what has been where the Russians, have advanced around this cauldron. And actually, apart from the very east and the northeast, they pretty much advanced in most of the areas. If we go to Trentselenko here, then this is another positive spin on what is going on from a Ukrainian point of view. This sort of thing happens when you push an offensive past its culminating point. This is the idea. Trentselenko is implying that the Russians have culminated and they can't really go any further and are arguably in more trouble than they would otherwise have been. Putin seems to be making Stalin in the winter of 1941-42 class errors here. So Stalin errors, that is good for Ukraine, he says. And he's referring to David D, who says, okay, wow, it looks like the Russians have bit off more than they can take with Avdiivka. The Ukrainian forces are counterattacking with one of the Western trained corps with added troops. Ukraine now outnumbers and outshoots the Russians in the area. They are attacking into the wounded Russian flanks from what is being reported both from Ukraine and Russian sides. Let's see how long the 114th DPR Russian brigade lasts. Someone asks, have results of this come out yet, or is this a prediction? He says, David D says, this is happening. Russians are stating that they are getting hammered there. But again, that is a positive outlook. I don't know that that's definitely the case going on there. We shall see. Suryat Maps says of the area, situation south of Avdiivka. The Russian army made small advances south of Siverny during the last days. Both the Ukrainian and Russian army brought reinforcements to this front as battles are expected to be very tough in the coming days, where it will be difficult to make changes in the terrain. So that is kind of backing up what David D says, in that the Ukrainians have brought reinforcements into the area, and it's unlikely that there'll be too much territorial exchange. It'll be interesting to see whether the Ukrainians are now in a better position than the Russians, or whether it is whether the Russians still have the advantage in terms of momentum and in terms of firepower, equipment, and so on. Right, Dmitry from War Translators says Russian reporter Filatov, who is present in the Avdiivka front line, explains what went wrong. Newly arrived reserves were meant to demine paths for vehicle columns, then to be followed by other forces, including the 114th Brigade. The goal was to overwhelm Ukrainian positions and artillery. However, for unclear reasons, it was 114th that went first and ended up under extreme Ukrainian shelling, causing major losses. The following columns faced the same fate, as no demining took place. Filatov complains also about disingenuous reports that were being sent to the higher-ups regarding Avdiivka. And this is a problem that happened in Kherson, which has led to the commander in Kherson being relieved and replaced by Teplinsky, who's in charge of the VDV, the paratroopers. So that is, as I said this morning, not an uncommon criticism from Russian sources. I won't read this out because actually Dmitry does a pretty good job of summarizing it, but I just, give you the end here. Liars and cowards, that's who's to blame for the negative success of the first stage of the operation. And right now, the Ukrops are using the positions taken by the neighbour to try and get back the railway line. All coincidences are not accidental. The necessary information is available. This is the obvious thing that I understood being at the theatre and adjusting one of the guns. So this is from someone in the area who is complaining about, as he says, caused terrible losses. And after 3 hours, it came down to the late column of neighbours that went to unmined fields. And who ended clean and without losses? The one who did nothing. But on the map, he already went behind the railway line and broke into the village and gave insights about the progress of the advance. But he did not show his achievements proved by objective control. So not too happy about how things have gone there. You can pause the video and read all of that. And we go back to the ISW, quite a lot to be said here. Broadly repeating what was said yesterday, to be honest, but there's a number now put on these forces. The Russian forces appear to have concentrated a sizable portion of their combat power around Avdiivka. Ukrainian Tavrisk group of forces spokesperson Stupin stated yesterday that Russia currently has 40,000 personnel in the Avdiivka direction and is transferring additional manpower to the area. So this then goes back to Suriyat Maps claiming that the Russians are loading in reinforcements as well as Ukrainians. So this could be the new kind of flashpoint in the whole front line. So it's moved almost from Robotyne to Avdiivka. And I don't know whether that is preferable for the Russians to have done that, but they seem to have successfally distracted the Ukrainians away to this point on the front line. What else do we have to say? So this is going back to a geolocation. So the ISW goes on to talk about those 40,000 being made up of all of these different units that, as others have claimed, are undermanned units. And so it's not ideal for the Russians, but they do have a great variety of units there, apparently. And we're going to go now to some geolocations. So this is Russian armoured assault north of Mariinka. Okay, so this is now coming down to the Krasnohorivka area where apparently the Russians have made some advances. This is the ISW saying that geolocated footage published yesterday indicated that Russian forces advanced south of Krasnohorivka. So this is armour moving forwards. It's difficult though when you have moving vehicles because you're not quite sure if it's in the grey zone, although it might signify that they've advanced. It could well be advancing into the grey zone. Doesn't necessarily mean they have control. Either way, though, it is still within the area of control that Suriyat Maps has for Russian control, even if it's not what Andriy Perpetua claims is under Russian control. This will be a case probably of driving up, as they've done before, up these tree lines. We have seen that happen, and we've seen the Russians take some heavy losses in doing so. The next claim is that armour approaches a tree line and hits Ukrainian positions. So this again will be a case of Ukrainians actually being there and might not necessarily indicate that the Russians have advanced or that they control. So if that's the case and you've got Ukrainians there, then it does call into question whether this is all robustly controlled by the Russians. So I'd take the ISW claim of Russian advances there with a pinch of salt, but it is probably a big grey zone around there and tough fighting for both sides. Right, coming now out of Krasnohorivka and past Vuhledar and come on to Velika Novosilka, where there is really not a lot of information coming out. It's gone particularly quiet. I mean, there are claims of activity around Staromayorska and Novodonetska, but nothing particularly to write home about. So we'll go and move to the west and down to Robotyne, where there are some gains for the Ukrainians in this sector. If we come to the ISW, a prominent mill blogger, they say, Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces managed to establish stable control over some unspecified Russian positions in Zaporizhia direction and tried to expand offensive operations near to Nestoryanka. So Nestoryanka is here outside of this salient down to Novoprokopivka and more along on the way to the Vasilivka area. So Nestoryanka there. The Ukrainians have had some success just northwest of Nestoryanka over the last week. Could well be continued Ukrainian focus there. And also in the direction of Novofedorivka and Kopani this week. So that is to say Kopani here, and that could indicate that could be reflected by this movement for the Ukrainians there, but also towards Novofedorivka, which is up here. So perhaps the Ukrainians having some joy north of Verbove, or at least putting pressure on. The mill blogger added that Ukrainian forces also tried to advance near Novoprokopivka and Verbove. Another prominent Russian mill blogger claimed the intensity of hostilities there has decreased, but the Ukrainian forces continue efforts to break through Russian defences, particularly in the Kopani-Robotna line, so around here. And indeed, as you can see, Syriac Maps has some gains for the Ukrainians as they are pushing slowly westwards towards Kopani. As you can see from the map, there are fewer established, the big old tank trench ditches and manned trench lines, these more sizable ones around the Kopani area. But that doesn't mean it's any easier. There'll be tree lines. Every tree line will be dug into. So as we've discussed many times before, really difficult to move quickly in these areas. Right. Syriac Maps says that the Ukrainian army took advantage over a failed Russian attack, and they launched a counterattack and made small advances west of Robotyne, and that's what we can see on my map. And also claimed by Global War Monitor that west of Robotyne, Ukraine has advanced slightly across the field, where they lost a Leopard 2A4 the other day. There have been some Leopard tanks lost in this area, number over the last week, probably about 6 or so, I think, counting up what I've seen. But yes, some gains for the Ukrainians there, where recently there's been no movement. So good news for them, I guess. And then we come down to the Kherson and the Dnipro River and its delta. Quite a bit of activity to report on here. Okay. We're going to go to Krinky, just to say that's Krinky. We then have the Konka Island area, which I think is possibly this area here, possibly even that island, by the Antonivsky rail bridge. And now you have the Antonivsky bridge there. We have some Ukrainian gains, as according to Syriac Maps, or the contested area increased over in this direction too. Some Russian gains, as according to Syriac Maps, near Pidstepny, so pushing the Ukrainians back there. Not agreed to by Andrew Perpetua yet, but that might happen. Right, let's go to the ISW. Quite a lot to be said about this area. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces maintain positions on the East Bank and continued cross-river raids yesterday. Prominent Russian claimed that Ukrainian forces unsuccessfully tried to advance near Pishchanivka and maintained a small bridgehead near Krinky. A Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces do not have a stable bridgehead, however. The mill blogger added that Russian forces intercepted a Ukrainian landing in a Dachi area. Okay, so this is to say that's a Dachi area by the Antonivsky Bridge, the main road bridge. But the claim is, from some Russians at least, that they don't have a stable bridgehead, even though they do have presence on that side of the river. Another Russian mill blogger claimed Ukrainian forces are crossing the Dnipro in groups of 50 to 70 people in 3 directions. Russian sources also indicated that Ukrainian forces continue to operate along the small railway bridge on the east bank of the Dnipro. And I don't know whether that is this Antonivsky rail bridge there, which then goes on down to the bridge over the Konka just here. So this island, I don't know if this island is the Konka Island, but we'll drop into a few sources because it gets mentioned. First of all, as mentioned, the commander for the Russian forces has been replaced. The claim is that he was replaced because he wasn't reporting accurately on what was going on there. Sort of this idea of Varanyo passing up the chain of command. It's just the BS being reported of losses and situations that paint a rosy picture, particularly for the Russians, as they don't like giving bad news to their seniors. Situation occurs on front during the last week. Expanded area of control around Krinky. So, as you can see, an expanded area just to the west of the Krinky bridgehead. We'll come over here. So you can see that expanded in this direction. Going back to Surat maps, Russian army, expanded control. Russian army's inability to recover the lost areas and the big casualties during the last days led to the destitution of commander of the Dnipro, General Makarovich, who was replaced by Colonel General Toplinsky. So this is to accept, at least from Surat Maps' point of view, that the Russians have been taking heavy casualties in the area. Tendar, German source says Ukrainian forces liberated Krinky on the south side of the Dnipro and Konka River. There are some fairly maximalist claims about liberating the whole of Krinky. I mean, Krinky's a fairly large place, right? So I don't think that's happened, but that's kind of what you hear from a number of people. I think it's just parts of Krinky. Indeed, just the mapping here suggests that Krinky was not liberated, but parts of it might well have been. The No report says Ukrainians have established themselves inside Krinky. A bigger thread, including some footage, is included here. Sorry, I keep having to stop to sneeze outrageously. This is a thread that I shared with you yesterday, so it's not going to be fully updated. That's 28th, so we're now on the 30th. But the claims are that Ukrainians do have presence in Krinky. Here we have another source, Global War Monitor, saying that Ukrainians have kept its foothold there and expanded upon it, except it's not just moving to the west, as according to Surat Maps, but also somewhat to the northeast as well. And then Julian Rupka, not the most reliable of sources, I guess. The Ukrainian army liberated parts of Krinky on the left bank and of the Konka in Kherson Oblast. I geolocated footage but won't point to the right buildings for security reasons. Russian exchanged their commander in the region and vowed to retain a village. So he's using geolocated footage to suggest that certainly this wide part of the actual settlement itself is under control of the Ukrainians. Pretty much there. Right, and then we'll get on to also the idea that they have reportedly liberated most of the Konka island south of Dnipro. So Tendar says, aside from Krinky, Ukrainian forces also liberated islands along the Dnipro and Konka River next to the rail bridge near Kherson. So this is going back down the river to the island I was talking about, this island by the railway bridge. That is what's indicated by Tendar there, and all under Ukrainian controllers, according to him. And then someone else, this is Dmitry from War Translators, saying, important is the Kherson front line where Ukrainians continue crossing the Dnipro. Tendar gives solid updates on the situation when we refer to him. It's an area of concern for several Russian military reporters. Romanov is quite outspoken on this, reporting daily. He says first-person view drones attacks on vehicles are concerning. Ukrainian artillery prevents Russians from assaulting Ukrainian footholds. He also says FPVs are used as mines. They landed in a concealed area waiting for the personnel to arrive. I don't know if that's them being able to be triggered remotely, but we'll just read what he says here. It's not too long. So he says, of the Kherson district, Rake district, a threatened area to the right of the railway bridge. About some tricks of the enemy revealed during my presence. Before tanks or artillery start working, the enemy places smoke in another area in order to distract attention. The enemy uses first-person view, so that's decoy smoke. The enemy uses first-person view for mine ambushes. The drone flies up and carefully sits in the ambush, waits for fighters to appear in the range of the explosives. The enemy is observing from the second drone. So they have a first-person view drone that just hovers quietly until troops come along, and then a spotted drone says, right, they're coming near, and then I presume, going from a hovering position, it just then hits the ground and explodes. And finally, it was also possible to suppress and take one first-person view of the enemy. Among the peculiarities, their batteries are more powerful than ours. The guys have already taken this knowledge into work So I thought that would be pretty obvious to get the most powerful batteries you can for those things. So I don't think that's exactly giving away too many secrets. Nonetheless, might be a concern for the Ukrainians. Now, Surat Maps, as I said, has some slight Russian gains along this line, though, in one of the areas there. And Ukrainian gains much further down the river. So interesting. Again, the Kherson region, I think it offers the Ukrainians a little bit of hope here in achieving something in the immediate future where it's kind of ground to a much slower advance in the Robotna area. Velika Novosilka not really doing anything, and it's slow advancing in Bakhmut and trying to stop the Russians from advancing in Avdiivka. Will be interesting to watch Avdiivka to see how much each side throws at Avdiivka, the Russians and the Ukrainians, and whether they'll be robbing Peter to pay Paul, taking from places like Robotna, Velika Novosilka and elsewhere to try and get the upper hand in Avdiivka. Anyway, hopefully that was of use to you. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle bits.